Today we're going to be talking about how to create cinematic color grades for your videos. There are simple tricks that great colorists use to create cinematic color grades. And so I'm going to share with you 4 of those that you need to know in this video. That way you can turn your boring log or Rec 709 footage into a cinematic masterpiece just like this. So with that out of the way, let's hop into Premiere Pro and get started. This first tip is something I see so many beginner editors make, and that's not understanding the order of color grading. Let me explain. When you color grade your footage, you need to go in a specific order, and that order is starting with color correction, so changing log footage to Rec 709, and then we can go into our creative color grade. And then on top of all that, we can get into masking and advanced color grading features. If you don't do this in the right order, you can really destroy the image and you might not be taking full advantage of the dynamic range of your camera. So let me show you how you can do this practically. So what we're gonna do is make sure we select our clip, and then we're gonna go over to Lumetri Color here. I'm going to select that. If you don't see that on your project window, you can go up to Window, and you can scroll down and you should see Lumetri Color. And when you hit that, that window should pop up. We're going to close all these tabs and we're going to start in Basic Correction. Here, we have an option to put an input LUT. This is where we're going to do our color correction. Now, depending on the camera you shot with, you can use whatever conversion LUT that your camera manufacturer provides. And so I'll do that now. I've already installed it into Premiere, and so when I go down into Browse, I'll find the LUT on my projects. And now you'll see we are now color corrected. And just so we can stay organized, we can actually rename this by hitting the tab here, hitting rename. We'll call this color correction. And now when we hit effects here on our clip, and we pull up the effects controls, you can see we have a Lumetri Color with the title Color Correction. And from here, we can now do our color grade. To do that, we can go back into Lumetri Color here and add Lumetri Color Effect. Now this next effect, if we hop into Effects Controls, you'll see shows up under, but it just means it's gonna be happening on top of our color correction. And once again, just to stay organized, I'm going to hit this tab and rename this to color grade. And now we can add more of a creative look using this Lumetri color instead of our color correction. And so for example, I can add a creative LUT, which I have so many of. I can adjust the intensity of it, and it will look proper and accurate to the camera and the settings that we have. And if you want to see why this is so important, if we switch these two to change the order of them, you'll see that the colors don't look right, the exposure also becomes off, and the image just isn't properly being processed. And so understanding the correct order in which we do our color grading is paramount. And so I'm going to go and switch that back to the correct order, which is color correction first, and then our color grade on top. Now that you know the right order you need to color grade, let's cover one of the secret tips that pros use to shape light in their scenes, and that's using masks. For this, I like to actually use an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go to my project bin here. I'm going to hit right click, new item, and add an adjustment layer. I'll make sure it matches my sequence, which it does. And I'll simply drag that over this shot. And with it selected, we're going to go back and open Lumetri Color. And then I'll go on top here to Effect and add Lumetri Color Effect. And it should pop up in my effects controls on the adjustment layer. And the first thing I want to do here is actually create a sort of gradient, because I'm going to darken the foreground here so that we can sort of highlight the subject in the middle ground. So to do that, I'm going to the effects controls, and with Lumetri Color here, I'm going to select the square tool, and I'm going to make sure this covers the area I want it to cover, in which case is the foreground. And so I'm gonna make this really large because I need it to cover everything. So we can zoom out here. And what I want to do here next is go to mask feather. And I found like you really want this to be pretty gradual because otherwise it's gonna look too sudden and like you can clearly see the outline of the mask. And so I feathered this to 500 pixels or so. And you can see when we go back to our project window, you can see the outline of that feather. So starting from the bottom here, it's going to start degrading and then eventually it will fade out by the time it hits this second line. Now we can go back to basic correction and we can bring down the exposure to bring down the exposure of the foreground. Now this is all up to personal preference, but I really like creating a dramatic look with this mask. So I'll go down to negative 1.6 on the exposure. And you can start to see what it's doing to our image already. It's just ever so slightly darkening the foreground, making our subject pop a little bit more. And so what I'll like to do with that as well is add another mask to the top and do this same exact effect. And now we can see if I turn on and off this layer, we can see how much it's drawing our attention to the center of the frame simply by darkening the edges. Now, just to show one more way we can use gradients to create a cinematic image, I'm going to add an adjustment layer on top again. I'm going to add my Lumetri effect to it. And this time I'm going to use the circle mask and sort of give the illusion that sun is peeking through the edge where this window is. So I'm gonna make this pretty big to really show it off, this effect. And once again, we're gonna feather it, probably like 400. Let's try 400 on this one. Perfect. And now we can actually raise the exposure here. Make it something very dramatic here. And to give the illusion of warmth, I'll add some orange to this as well. You don't have to go too far with that. And you can see just the before and after of just simply doing that, what that does to our image to create the illusion that sun is really peeking out of the window left of frame. A pro tip here is if you're not on a static shot and the camera moves, you may need to track this mask. And so what you will have to do here is select the layer and on mask path, select track selected mask forward. And Adobe will track this mask across the clip. Shaping light will take your color grades to that next level, but let's actually touch on the color part of color grading next. To do this, we're actually going to go into our clip, make sure it's selected. We'll make sure we're selected on color grade, and we'll open up the color wheels and match tab. Here we're going to see 3 circles, each referring to different parts of the image. One being the shadows, which is the dark parts, midtones, which is sort of the middle bright parts, and then highlights, which are the brightest parts. And the color wheel allows us to change the color of those parts of the image, while the slider on the side allows us to adjust the brightness or darkness of that part of the image. Using this tool, we're going to actually do something which is known as adding color contrast, which is where you use 2 opposite colors on the ends of the color spectrum to create contrast in the image. And the most popular one, which I'm sure you've heard of, is orange and teal. Typically, teal is reserved for the shadowy portions of an image, while the orange part is made for midtones and highlights. And so we're going to actually mimic that by using these tools. So to add teal to our shadows, we select here at the beginning, and we're going to drag down and right till we get some nice cool tones. Not too far, you don't need to go too far with this. And then we'll do the opposite by selecting our midtones and highlights and going up left into the orange parts. And just so you can see a before and after, we can turn this on and off and see what it's done to our image. It's just ever so slightly adding some more warmth and cool tones to certain parts of our image, which helps create that cinematic look that you want. Now let's talk about contrast And a mistake that a lot of beginner editors make is using the contrast slider in Lumetri Color and not using curves. So let me show you how to use curves. You can see in Lumetri we have a curves tab here. We'll open it. And this line represents the brightness of our image. And the left side is the dark parts of our image, and the right side is our bright parts. So to add contrast, we need to make a few points on this line. I like making roughly 4. I add one here, here, in the center, here, and here. So this is closer to 5-ish. Now the classic way of adding contrast is by darkening our darks, our shadows. And then we add a little bit of brightness to our highlights. And now when we turn this on and off, you can see what it's been doing to our image. It's adding just that little extra punch of contrast to our image. And of course, you can do this to your liking as well. And in this case, I actually think the highlights don't need any brightening. I might actually bring those down just so we can see more of the sky here, as you can kind of see when we really bring it down. Now, if we add all these techniques together, you can see what it does to our images. Here's before and after. Before, after. If you want a further breakdown of any of these concepts I covered in this video, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll make a video covering them. In fact, this video was a specific request by a viewer and commenter on this channel. So definitely leave them down below because I do read each one. Thank you again for watching all the way until the end. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.